King Charles has cancer. It is not in remission, and according to every credible source covering the British monarchy right now, the man who spent more than 70 years waiting to be king is quietly doing something that no one in the royal family wants to discuss publicly. He is planning for what happens after him. Not in the abstract, long-term way that monarchies always plan. Not in the comfortable theoretical distance that succession planning usually carries. In the specific, close, urgent way of someone who has looked at a timeline and started making real decisions about real things. Tonight, we are going into that planning. What we actually know from credible reporting. What the informed speculation says about the parts we cannot know, and what William's eventual succession means for the single most complicated and least resolved question hanging over the British crown. What happens to Harry when his brother becomes king? Because the answer to that question is not inevitable. It is being shaped right now by choices that are being made behind closed doors, and the outlines of those choices are starting to become visible to people paying close enough attention. Because everything about the way that story resolves depends on decisions being made right now, behind doors that are not open to cameras, and the outlines of those decisions are becoming visible. Let's start with what is actually known and documented, because the speculation only makes sense against the real background. And because being clear about which is the thing that separates this kind of analysis from the AI-generated royal clickbait that fills up recommendation feeds with fictional meetings and invented final wishes. Operation Menai Bridge is real. It is the official codename for the succession plan covering the transition of power from Charles to William. From the moment of Charles's death through the announcement to the Prime Minister, the period of national mourning, the ceremonial arrangements, the proclamation of the new sovereign, and the formal transfer of every piece of institutional machinery that makes the monarchy function. Every department has its role, every announcement has its timing and its protocol. Every detail down to the specific language of the official communications has been prepared and reviewed. The operation did not come into existence because of Charles's cancer diagnosis. It existed before that because succession planning is a permanent institutional function in the British monarchy, an operation that runs quietly in the background because the alternative is institutional crisis at exactly the moment when stability is most urgently needed. What the cancer diagnosis changed was not the plan, but the emotional temperature around it. The conversation moved from theoretical to proximate in a way that everyone inside the palace structure understands clearly, even if no one articulates it directly in public. Charles knows this better than anyone. He is a man who spent more of his adult life as heir apparent than any British monarch in history. Decades of preparation, decades of waiting, decades of watching his mother perform a role that everyone around him knew would eventually be his. He has had more time than any living person to think about what the institution requires and what it costs. His cancer does not appear to have made him resigned or sentimental. By every credible account, it has made him focused and deliberate. The decisions he is making now, about the distribution of responsibilities, about which engagements transfer to William, about how the public and institutional roles are structured in the time he has, are not driven by emotion. They are driven by the understanding that what he leaves behind has to be stronger and more stable than what he inherited. William and Catherine have been absorbing responsibilities at a pace that observers who cover the royal family closely have noted explicitly and consistently. Solo engagements that would previously have stayed in Charles's diary are being transferred. Foreign visits carrying significant diplomatic weight are going to William. Catherine, who built her public role incrementally across more than a decade of public life, earning it through consistency rather than claim, is now operating at a level of visibility and institutional centrality that would have been unrecognizable in the early years of her marriage. Every senior royal engagement is now being read not just for its own content, but for what it signals about where the gravitational center of the institution is shifting. Charles is also, if the informed reading of his approach is correct, thinking about something that goes beyond the formal institutional succession planning. He is thinking about the human architecture of what comes after him, about the question of his sons and what the institution can hold of that particular human complexity without being damaged by it. He is thinking, as a father as well as a monarch, about whether there is a framework that allows both of his sons to be part of history rather than having one of them be written out of it entirely. That is the harder question, the one that no operational plan can answer, and the one that is generating the most uncertainty and the most quiet discussion among the people who study this family closely. Because it is the question where Charles's instinct and William's instinct point in different directions, and where the resolution depends on which instinct prevails. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture on this story, the documented parts, the speculative parts, and the honest acknowledgement of which is which, the like button costs nothing and it keeps this channel going. Here is where the speculation starts, and I want to be explicit about that transition, because it matters. This is where the documented record ends, and the informed reading of available signals begins. What follows is analysis grounded in what credible people who cover this family are observing and describing on background. Not invented, not fabricated, but not confirmed either. It is the difference between a theory with evidential support and a fact with sourced verification. The theory that has the most traction among royal commentators right now is that Charles is attempting something genuinely difficult: to leave a framework that acknowledges both sons without requiring them to be reconciled. Not a grand gesture toward reunion, not a formal restoration of Harry's status or his working royal role, but something that says to history, both of these people existed. Both of them matter to me as their father. And this institution should be able to contain that without requiring either of them to be erased. Whether that is achievable, given where William's position currently sits, is a different and harder question. William's position on Harry has hardened considerably over the last 2 years, and the evidence for this is observable rather than speculative. Every signal from William's orbit, the people who work with him, the correspondents who cover him, the sources who speak about him on background, suggests a man who has moved from wounded brother to institutionalist making cold calculations. He has watched his father's more forgiving instinct toward Harry produce, in his analysis, exactly what it produced with Andrew. The permanent availability of chaos attached to the family name, manageable in isolation but accumulating across incidents into something the institution cannot sustainably absorb. William's operating principle, once out, and the institution does not benefit from soft-pedaling that conclusion, is documented in reporting by multiple credible royal correspondents writing independently of each other. It is not about personal cruelty or emotional rigidity. It is his specific reading of what institutions require to survive reputational damage. The Andrew situation is his primary case study. He watched his father keep a door partially open to Andrew through a series of decisions that each seemed manageable individually, and that collectively produced years of ongoing damage to the monarchy's standing. Every time Andrew appeared at a family occasion, the story reopened. Every partial inclusion generated a new controversy. William's conclusion from watching that process is explicit. Sentiment, in institutional terms, is how problems return after you thought they were resolved. His position is not about punishing Harry. It is about preventing the mechanism that kept the Andrew situation alive from being repeated. Charles disagrees. Not loudly, not through public statements, but through the pattern of his behavior. The continued openness to back-channel contact, the reports of letters sent, the maintained availability that sources consistently describe. Charles is a father first and an institutionalist second. William is an institutionalist first and a brother second. That is the real internal tension in the monarchy right now, and it is a tension that will resolve only one way. When William is king, his principle becomes the operating principle of the institution. Until then, Charles's instinct creates a window that may or may not be used. Princess Anne occupies a specific and important role in all of this, and it is worth being precise about what that role actually is, both what it is and what it is not. She is not a formal mediator in the Harry-William situation. She is not a back channel or an intermediary between the two brothers in any documented or structured sense. What she is, and what she has always been within this family, is the member of the royal family most consistently trusted to say what she means without managing it for palatability. Within a family structure where almost every communication goes through multiple layers of advisors, spokespersons, and carefully calibrated positioning, where what people say publicly and what they actually believe have sometimes become entirely different things, Anne is the person who simply says what is true. That quality is not incidental. In a family where the gap between stated positions and actual positions has become one of the central sources of ongoing conflict, where press briefings, back-channel signals, memoir revelations, and spokesperson denials have made everyone suspicious of everyone else's real intentions. Someone who communicates directly, without the layers, without the management, is genuinely rare and genuinely useful. If Charles needs something communicated clearly to either of his sons without it being misunderstood, misremembered, or reinterpreted by the person receiving it, Anne is the person whose delivery they would know to take at face value. She has also maintained something that almost no other senior royal has managed across the Sussex period: She has not been drawn into the commentary. She has not become a character in the Sussex narrative in the way that other family members have. She has not been quoted, sourced, or positioned by any side. That neutral positioning is not passive. Within a family where everyone's alignment has become visible and consequential, maintaining neutral visibility requires active choice, and it makes her more, not less, valuable to the institutional process that Charles is managing. Now, let's talk about the generation that comes after, because it is the dimension of the succession story that tends to get the least attention and carries the most long-term weight. George is 12 years old, he is attending school, and by every account of people who have observed him publicly, developing into someone with genuine composure and presence. He is not performing for anyone. He is not being cultivated for the cameras in any visible way. He is being raised, as near as can be observed from the outside, by two people who understand from direct personal experience what it costs a child to be raised primarily for institutional purposes rather than for his own humanity first. William's entire public narrative about his own upbringing, the grief that was not processed, the expectations that left no room for ordinary childhood, the institutional requirements that competed with the human ones, is the material from which he and Catherine appear to be building a different model for their children. Whether they succeed in giving their children a childhood genuinely different from the one William experienced is something only time will reveal. But the intention is visible in the choices they make about exposure and privacy, and it matters for understanding what the succession picture actually involves beyond the formal constitutional sequence. Because the long-term question for the British monarchy is not what happens between William and Harry. That story, whatever its resolution, is essentially already over in terms of its institutional implications. The long-term question is what George's generation of the monarchy looks like, whether the institution can evolve in the hands of people who were raised with the awareness of what the old model cost into something that sustains public trust across the next 50 years. That is the question Charles's planning is ultimately in service of, even if it does not look that way from the outside, where the immediate drama is the Harry story and the health story. The immediate drama is real and it matters, and we have covered it in full. But the thing Charles is really trying to protect is the monarchy's ability to be handed to George in a condition that makes George's reign possible rather than impossible. One where the institution has demonstrated it can survive its most turbulent modern period and come through with its public trust intact. George is 12. He is probably at least 40 years from the throne if the current pattern of long reigns continues. 40 years is a long time. The decisions being made right now about how the family resolves its internal fractures, about what the institution looks like when William's reign begins, about what role, if any, Harry plays in the record of Charles's era, all of these will be part of the context George inherits. They will be the background of his understanding of what the monarchy is and what it requires. And that is the reason they matter beyond the immediate drama of who attended which wedding and whether a phone number exists. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and drop your take in the comments below. Do you think Charles is trying to leave a framework that includes Harry, or has he accepted William's harder position? Now let's talk about Catherine, because her position in this story is genuinely different from how it tends to get described, and understanding it correctly changes the picture considerably. Catherine was not born into the institution. She came from outside it, and the institution was not automatically welcoming. The years of tabloid commentary about whether she was serious enough, committed enough, suited enough, years that would have broken many people's relationship with the idea of royal life before it had formally begun, are the years during which she built the single quality that has made her indispensable to the institution in its current state: composure under sustained and unjust pressure. She did not respond to the coverage. She did not give interviews defending herself. She did not brief journalists with counter-narratives. She showed up, she did the work, and she waited for the record to speak for itself. That is not a passive or weak response. In the context of an institution that is watching every move for signs of instability, it is the strongest possible response, because it gives the people watching nothing to report except the work itself. What she has built across 2 decades is something the institution values above almost everything else in the people who are central to it: reliability. She shows up, she prepares. She does not use public appearances to send personal messages or settle private scores. She does not brief against anyone. She does not give interviews that require managing afterward. She absorbs an extraordinary level of public scrutiny without publicly breaking. During her cancer diagnosis and treatment, a period that would have tested anyone's private composure, and that was conducted under the most intense public scrutiny imaginable, with conspiracy theories circulating about whether she was even actually ill. She maintained a public presence that was measured, clearly genuine, and managed with her children's well-being as the visible and actual priority. That quality, sustained reliability under extreme and unjust pressure, is what has made her central to the succession picture in a way that goes beyond the formal constitutional role of queen consort. The monarchy needs people around whom the institutional structure can organize itself without generating secondary problems. People who perform their role predictably, without requiring management, without creating controversies that then require resources to contain. Catherine has become one of those people to a degree that many observers did not fully recognize because it was built so quietly and so consistently over such a long period that it looked less like strategy and more like character. And perhaps it is both. When William becomes king, Catherine becomes queen. In the specific context of everything that has happened in this family across the last 5 years, the contrast between the way Catherine has conducted herself and the way the Sussex operation has conducted itself will be the most visible thing about the two households without anyone needing to draw attention to it. Not because Catherine will make any point of it, she will not, but because the institutional record will simply be there, legible to anyone who reads it. Now let's be honest about the Harry question, because it is the one that does not have a clean answer and probably will not get one in any of our lifetimes. And I want to be clear that this section is my reading of the available signals, not a report of known facts. Harry is not going to disappear. His titles are not going to be formally stripped in any near-term scenario, not because William lacks the eventual constitutional authority to recommend it, but because the public spectacle of formally stripping a Duke of Sussex of his title and the titles of his children generates more institutional damage than simply maintaining a fiction of distant toleration. The controversy, the coverage, the legal challenges that would follow, the narrative that generates for the Sussex operation, all of it costs the monarchy more than the continued existence of titles that are not being actively used causes harm. The more likely outcome, which most serious observers of this family are now converging on, is something less dramatic and more permanent. Harry becomes increasingly peripheral by the passage of time and the gravitational logic of everything that matters happening somewhere he is not present, not excluded through any single definitive act, simply made irrelevant by accumulation. The coronation has happened. The investiture of the Prince of Wales will happen when William becomes king and George is named heir. The state visits, the family occasions that mark the passage of royal life across generations, the public ceremonies that write the institutional record, these will all happen. Harry will not be present at most of them, not because a formal decision has been made to exclude him, but because the conditions under which he could attend, conditions involving genuine trust, workable security arrangements, and the absence of the reasonable fear that any proximity will become content in a documentary or a memoir chapter, do not currently exist and are not being rebuilt from any direction that is visible. The commercial operation he built to replace the institutional connection has contracted at every level. The personal relationships, the Beckhams, the celebrity friendships, the Hollywood access have mostly reoriented elsewhere. The Spotify deal is gone. The Netflix arrangement has restructured. The lifestyle brand has lost half its American web traffic in 4 months. And the one man whose health creates the most urgent window for any form of reconciliation, his father, is managing a cancer that is not in remission while the summer approaches without a confirmed meeting on the calendar. What Charles's succession planning represents, if the informed reading of his approach is right, is a final attempt to leave a framework generous enough that both sons can find their place within the record of his reign. Not together, because that is not realistic now and may never be, but separately, with enough acknowledgement on both sides that history does not simply read this as the family that destroyed itself. Whether William accepts that framework is the question that nobody outside the family can answer. He is not his father. His instinct is not to hold space for complexity or leave doors ajar. His instinct is to draw a clean line and hold it without revisiting. And once he is king, the clean line becomes institutional rather than personal. It becomes the operating principle of the British Crown itself, embedded in decisions about access and protocol and presence that outlast any individual conversation. What happens then is genuinely unknown, not unknowable in the way that conspiracy theory is unknowable, where evidence is lacking because the theory is invented rather than evidenced. genuinely uncertain in the way that human decisions made under pressure by people with competing instincts and competing obligations are always uncertain until the moment they are made. The documents are prepared. The protocols are ready. Operation Menai Bridge will execute exactly as designed when the moment comes. What it cannot account for is the human dimension. Two brothers who have not shared a public space in nearly 3 years. A father who kept hoping, a sister-in-law who kept the door open longest and finally stopped, and the question of whether any of that will matter at all when the crown passes and the new reign begins. That is the story that no plan can fully write in advance. It is the story this family is living in real time, and it will resolve in a way that nobody, not the people inside the palace, not the people who cover it, not the brothers themselves, can currently predict with confidence. What do you think happens to Harry's place in the family once William becomes king, and is there any scenario you can actually imagine where the brothers share the same room again without it becoming a problem for one or both of them? Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. The like button keeps this channel doing this kind of analysis. Grounded in what is real, honest about what is speculation, and clear about the difference between the two. Until the next one. The succession is coming, and when it does, everything we have discussed here becomes the background to the story that follows.